Once upon a time, there lived four best friends, Mr. Mouse, Mr. Squirrel, Mr. Tortoise, and Mr. Bird. They all lived in peace, love, and harmony. Mr. Mouse was a thief. Stealing grains, seeds, and nuts was just an easy thing for him. Mr. Squirrel was a royal guard at the king's food store and safe house. It contained all varieties of meals, wines, cash crops, and sweet wrappers in it. Mr. Tortoise was the king's farmer. He would grow all kinds of grains, seeds, and nuts in his little garden. Mr. Bird was the king's pilot and messenger. He would carry the king everywhere he went. He would even carry the king's messages to God himself. Amongst the four best friends, Mr. Mouse was the only one who had no job and was the most pitiful, always putting on an innocent look. And so because of this, Tortoise, the king's farmer, would always save some grains, seeds, and nuts from his little garden for Mr. Mouse and his family. And Mr. Squirrel, the king's food store royal guard, would always bring meals, wines, and sweet wrappers for Mr. Mouse and his family as well. And Mr. Bird, the king's messenger, would always carry Mr. Mouse and his messages for free because he never had money to pay. The three friends would always share all they have with their friend Mr. Mouse. But Mr. Mouse was ungrateful. He would mock and laugh at his friends in private with his family for being so kind. He intends to take from his friends till they run dry. For months to years, Mr. Mouse has lived upon the shoulders of his friends, taking from them a little here and a little there without offering anything in return. Sooner than he thought, Mr. Mouse's house became too full of food. Then he built a food store to preserve some and more that he always received from his friends. Mr. Mouse and his family in no time became so healthy, without skipping a day's square meal. Meanwhile, his friends Mr. Squirrel, Mr. Tortoise, Mr. Bird, and their family started to grow pale. The villagers would call the three good friends fools for always sharing all they had with their friend. But they never minded. They kept giving to their friend Mr. Mouse with joy. One day, there was going to be trouble in the land. The king could feel it. So the king sent his messenger Mr. Bird on a 3-day journey to God, to go and seek his help for their land. Before the bird took off the flight to the heavens, he held a meeting with his three best friends Mr. Mouse, Mr. Squirrel, and Mr. Tortoise. He pleaded they help look after his family for 3 days while he is away, and they all agreed. Mr. Bird then began his journey to God. He fled past the clouds into heavy storms, and then he finally reached heaven. While he was away, his friends except Mr. Mouse looked after his family. They provided his family with food and other assistance. Mr. Bird then received a message from God. God told him there was going to be a great famine for 7 whole seasons and that every man must help another to survive. Mr. Bird then began his journey back to earth. He fled past the cloud into heavy storms, and then finally he reached the king. He delivered the message to the king, telling him all that God had instructed. The king then passed a command that all men in the land should help each other in these 7 seasons. During the famine, everyone in the community shared the little they had amongst themselves, surviving from a little here and there. But Mr. Mouse only shared with his family. They had enough to take them for even 14 seasons. Mr. Mouse and his family made merry and drank in great quantities while his friends managed the little they had and starved. It was only 4 seasons gone when everything in the land was totally finished, and God had another message for the king, and Mr. Bird had to travel for another long journey again to heaven. but Mr. Bird had no strength to move his wings because he was so hungry. He had stayed for over 5 days without food or water because everything in the land had finished except for the king's storehouse and Mr. Mouse's secret storehouse. So the king passed a message to every villager to gather at the market square so that their houses could be searched to find food for Mr. Bird to feed. When Mr. Mouse heard the message, he called out every one of his family members so they could carry out all the food in the house to add to those at his secret storehouse because he didn't want to share. The foodstuffs were so much that it took them so long to finish and later joined every other villager at the market square. When everyone had finally gathered, the king then asked his guard to search every house for food. Every villager in the land knew that Mr. Mouse would be caught with lots of food because they knew he didn't share. But no food was found in his house, not even a pin. This surprised everyone, even the king himself. When the search was done, everyone went into their houses again, with each villager grumbling with another, discussing the issue angrily. The king saw this and was troubled, and he decided to give up the royal meal for Mr. Bird to feed on, while the royal family starved. Mr. Bird was invited over to the palace where he ate and drank enough to get him ready for the journey. When the villagers saw this, they praised the king. As Mr. Bird took off his flight, there was a loud shout and joy in the land as every villager cheered. Mr. Bird fled past through the clouds, heavy storms, and finally reached God after 3 days. God gave his instructions to Mr. Bird that he has seen how they have shared amongst themselves, that he shall rebuild the land and bless it with abundant food, that every man who shared would receive a double portion, and those who didn't share would lose everything they have and not be part of this blessing. Then God blessed Mr. Bird and asked him to journey back. Once more, Mr. Bird fled past the clouds and heavy storms and finally reached the king. He delivered the message as God instructed. Then the king announced to all the villagers and told them, God has had mercy on all who shared, but not for those who didn't share. When Mr. Mouse heard the news, he was scared and worried. Then God caused his secret storehouse to burn down in fire with everything in it because he refused to share. Then God blessed everyone in the land who had shared amongst themselves a double portion as he promised. God blessed the king too, with lots to feed and drink. Mr. Mouse and his family were sad and sorry for being so cruel to the others and even to his 3 best friends when they had no food to feed. He apologized to every villager and to his friends and even to the king for defying his instructions and not sharing. Seeing how sorry he was, God had mercy on him and caused his 3 best friends and the king and all the villagers to have mercy too. They all went into their houses bringing out food and drinks for Mr. Mouse and his family to feed from, a little here, a little there. The king was pleased. It is good to forgive one another when they have wronged you. It is good to show mercy, for that is true morality and righteousness. And they lived happily ever after.
Please subscribe to watch more of our videos. Thank you.